Okay, I have 2:02, so I'm going to get started. Hi, everyone. My name is Anna McLaughlin. I'm the Program Director for Transportation Program Management here at AASHTO. I want to happily welcome you all to webinar 69 in our Transportation Asset Management webinar series, sponsored by FHWA and AASHTO. Before I really get started on the webinar, I also want to put a plug in for CPBM's annual meeting and joint conference. We're meeting in conjunction with the Committee on Planning and the Committee on Data Management and Analytics. We're going to be in St. Louis, September 17th through 19th. Come meet me at the Arch. Registration is currently open. The agenda is posted. I will drop the registration link in the chat, and I hope to see some of you there. Check that out. But back to business. During today's webinar, we are going to feature speakers from New Mexico DOT, Michigan DOT, and Utah DOT discussing TAM and change management, knowledge management, training, and capability building. We have presented webinars in this series every 2 months going back to 2012 on a variety of topics in asset management. For more information on this webinar series, you can visit the tam-portal.com. That's tam-portal.com. From there, you can click on events in the main menu to register for any of our upcoming webinars. You'll also find archives of previous webinars, and the links to the video and slides from today's webinar will be posted on the site as well. The TAM portal is home of the AASHTO Subcommittee on Asset Management. For information on the subcommittee, we would love to have your participation. You can visit the tamportal.com and click on Subcommittee on Asset Management under the Community menu. If you have any suggestions on future webinar topics or have questions for the presenters during today's webinar, please submit your comments or questions using the Zoom chat feature. We will answer questions during the Q&A session at the end of the webinar, where we will invite audience members to unmute and share their questions or comments during the group discussion session at the end. If you haven't already, please make sure you're muted so your audio doesn't interrupt presenters. Everybody always appreciates that. Thank you in advance. And now we actually have a recorded message from our good friend Tasha Clemens at FHWA.
In the Office of Infrastructure. Good afternoon or good morning to everyone joining us today. I'm Tasha Clemens, and I represent the Transportation Asset Performance Team in the Office of Infrastructure of Federal Highway Administration. Federal Highways, in cooperation with the AASHTO Subcommittee on Asset Management, is very pleased to sponsor this webinar series. We feel it's a great way to bring people together around a series of important topics and to connect with the asset management community. The TAM Guide Chapter 3, titled Organization and People, states that asset management is not possible without people within the organization who are committed to its success. This part of the asset management framework involves establishing TAM roles, responsibilities, creating competencies, strengthening coordination and communication, and managing change. So today's speakers will share practices that address these topics. With this webinar, we are extremely excited to say that we have reached the 69th webinar in our series, and FHWA's Transportation Asset Performance Team is committed to increasing knowledge and capabilities at transportation agencies across the U.S. I do encourage you to visit us online for more information and to gain access to available resources. The address for you is shown on the screen. And finally, I just wanted to say thank you for your participation. You will enjoy today's presentation. So now I would like to turn it over to Hayana Parks of Spike Pond Partners to give an overview of today's webinar, to review today's agenda, and to introduce our speakers. Hayana?
All right, thank you, Tasha. So as Anna mentioned previously, the purpose of this webinar series is to share lessons learned, ideas, and knowledge with the asset management community. For this webinar, the primary learning objectives are to learn about the TAM Guide Chapter 3, Organization and People, highlight practices from several state transportation agencies regarding TAM, including change management, knowledge management, training, and capability building, and review information on establishing TAM roles and responsibilities and competencies. And of course, share lessons learned, ideas, and knowledge. For the agenda today, we started off by hearing from Anna and Tasha. I will introduce our speakers before each presentation, but in brief, they are Virginia Stubella from the New Mexico DOT. Virginia will be presenting on NMDOT's TAMP knowledge management efforts. Bradley Sharlow of Michigan DOT will be discussing their TAM program assessment. And Patrick Cowley and Chris Whipple from Utah DOT will be sharing their work on TAM organization and people, goals, objectives, and strategies. Time permitting, we'll have an open group discussion at the end. Just another reminder, please submit your comments or questions using Zoom's chat feature at any time during the webinar. We'll make sure to cover them at the end of the webinar. And as I think most of you know, we'll make the slides and video available after today's webinar at tam-portal.com. One final note for our presenters to keep things moving along, I will chime in to remind you when you have a couple of minutes remaining in your time that we've allotted. I'm guessing have fingers crossed that we'll all be just fine. So for this webinar, I am going to give the topic overview. So let me just switch now to sharing my screen. So I think, yes, thanks. All right. Can you guys see it in full screen?
Looks good.
All right, thank you. All right, so as has been already mentioned, we're kind of using the TAM guide, the AASHTO TAM guide, which has a section on organization and people. And just to give it context for this year's webinars, what we're doing is I think many of you participated in a survey back in the November, December timeframe. The survey was reorganized around the TAM guide framework. And then people were asked to share where they thought they were in maturity and where they wanted to be more mature and what areas that they had practices. And so we're using that input to shape this year's webinar. So we had the one on equity. Equity was one of a top priority issue. And we looked at the gap between where people felt they were less mature, but wanted to get more mature and have greater understanding. And so organization and people, workforce was a topic that also was of higher priority. And so we'll be using the TAM guide to set the context, but then we'll have the presenters talk about what they're doing in their agencies as part of this webinar. So right now we're just wrapping up the updates to the digital edition of the TAM Guide. I think all of you have seen the PDF, the hard copy version, and then there is the TAM Guide, the digital edition that kind of mirrors the paper guide. And so this project came out to enhance it kind of in between the kind of roughly every 10 years, the TAM guide officially gets updated. And the idea was to keep the paper guide whole, but then use the digital guide to freshen it up with the practices and interests that are more relevant today. And so this the updated TAM guide should be available probably in the next month. We're just wrapping up the project now. And so what I'm going to focus today really is give you a little bit of what's coming in the updated TAM guide related to organization and people. So this is the TAM Guide framework. You're going to see it again when Patrick and Chris talk about the Utah approach. But it's you can see that without organization and people, a lot of the things you're trying to get done with asset management can't be done. So you need to pay attention to that in order to make the whole operation work well. So the chapter purpose, I think Tasha mentioned, the beginning of that chapter is about TAM is not possible with the people within the organization, but kind of really if we all think about it and we see where success has been, and you can probably associate it with something that's related to a person, like some leader or somebody showing leadership from a technical perspective. So the people side's really important, and that when you're making advancements, how your organization functions and how your workforce is kind of empowered to do it is probably just as important as the technical side. And so the chapter now has 5 sections. The original guide that was published in 2020, but really completed in the late 2018, early 2019 timeframe, and then it just takes a long time to go through the publication process. Had the first 3 sections on roles and responsibilities and competencies, coordination and communication, and managing change. But with this enhancement and update to the guide, 2 new sections were added, one on managing the TAM workforce and the other on knowledge management for TAM, kind of recognizing the importance of these 2 new sections and topics. So the other thing, just so that, to orient you to what we did, because we had to keep the existing guide whole. So there was no major surgery on the organization. We kept the organization, but, where we wanted to, we added sections to the existing guide. We definitely added a lot of new research projects as references and resources. We added new practice examples and new checklists and how-tos. And then another major thing we did were new videos. We had just dabbled with videos in the first guide. I think maybe there were 2 in there, but this time we added many more. And then another brand new thing is we're adding a new audio feature. So kind of like you could approach it like an audio book and download a chapter and listen to it in your car or when you're running or whatever. But we're trying to, make it so that the content in the guide is more easily accessible and used. And then this new knowledge check actually came out of the hackathon we did in the middle of last year, and Utah DOT that had submitted a lot of ideas for ways to improve the TAM guide had suggested this kind of a quiz test component. And so that was added. And so these the knowledge check basically goes through, so I think roughly 5 to 10 questions for each chapter, and you get to test yourself to say, did you read and learn what was in the guide? Whoops. And then the last thing that's exciting is there is a new TAM assessment, and I'll just touch upon it quickly in one of the later slides, but this will be also available to everybody. All right, so what do the new sections have? So in chapter 3, we have 2 new sections. So the first one is on workforce, and when you come to that section, it'll indicate that it's a new section, and it's on managing the TAM workforce. And then it has 2 subsections, one on TAM workforce development and one on TAM workforce management. So workforce development is focused on how do you plan, recruit, and kind of do the things so that you're having the workforce you need. And then TAM workforce management is focused on kind of enabling your workforce to be more successful through collaboration and communication and good feedback mechanisms. And then the last section of chapter 3 now is knowledge management for TAM. I think many of you know that this is of growing importance as retirements happen, but also I think technology is enabling us to be better at capturing knowledge and delivering it. And Virginia from New Mexico DOT is going to be speaking about her effort on this later in the webinar. But here it's organized into 2 subsections: accumulating knowledge. This is how do you set up the right kind of infrastructure, because it has to be explicit to be able to grab knowledge. And then the second part is how do you use and build on the knowledge you have. Then I'm just going to walk quickly through the new components, but here I'm not going to go through each of them, but there are lots of new research and resources. So in this chapter 3, you can imagine that this, almost because of COVID, the interest in workforce and organization has really become more of a priority in transportation agencies, and as a result, there are more resources available for that. One of the cool things that's there is a kind of this top one here, Washington's Workforce Development Toolkit, and they have it open for everyone, so you can go to it online and you can see what they're using and borrow some of the good strategies and apply it in your agency. And then new practice examples. So if you've used the guide, you know that there are a lot of practice examples throughout the guide, and so the practices that have happened since the last set have been added to freshen the examples. New checklists have been added, so just to enhance what's already there, and especially in the new topic areas. And then new how-tos where you go through and kind of walk through how would you do onboarding of new TAM staff, for instance, like this one. And then lots of new videos. And one of the things we did that I think will be helpful to you all is, we have a set of individual videos. Here's one from Tricia Stefanski and Chris Whipple, both in that are in chapter 3, where they're talking about an element of organization and people that that they're working on in their agency and sharing a practice. But then you see in the bottom here, we've taken the TAM webinar presentations, and we've linked them to the sections of the guide where it is a resource. So you can watch that webinar again. These are all of the ones that have already happened. And then the other thing that we did is, we had TAM topics that's already there, but we added some new topics, and these are topics that kind of cut across all of the chapters. And so a new topic on equity has been added. And then we also updated existing topics. So we had workforce as a topic and communication as a topic, and those have been updated to reflect any new practices or new guidance that's available. And then, as I mentioned earlier, at the top of every chapter, you'll be able to click on an audio file that reads the chapter as, like an audible book. And then here's the example on chapter 3 of the quiz, what we're calling knowledge checks. So at the end of the chapter, you can take it to just see, did I get the understanding? And you would get 100 if you answer all the questions correctly, and you get a certificate, so you can kind of show that you mastered all of the chapters. And then in the TAM assessment, that's a fairly involved assessment, kind of like the TAM data assessment. So this was a project that was developed by AppTech under a NCHRP project, probably like 12 years ago, and it had a Excel tool to conduct the assessment. And so one of the items in this project was to make that web enabled. So what we updated the assessment to reflect current understanding of practice, and then we use the TAM data assistant kind of approach to an assessment and applied it. So for those of you who have done the TAM data assessment, you'll see similar kinds of techniques in this. So we look forward to you all getting value out of this. So thank you, and let's move on to, I'm gonna stop sharing and switch to back to my moderator role here. All right, so now let's shift, and we'll be hearing from our state DOT speakers. First up is Virginia Stubella of New Mexico DOT. She's the Transportation Performance Management Manager. Virginia helped with the development of the 2022 New Mexico TAMP and will be managing the development of the 2026 TAMP. She's a certified asset manager and has a passion for data. She's highly invested in expanding knowledge management at NMDOT because they'll be losing a lot of institutional knowledge over the next few years due to retirements. Virginia.
Hi. So I haven't done this before on an ASTRO seminar, so I'm a little bit nervous, but I'll do my best. So Hannah asked if I wanted to do the knowledge management piece for this, and I kind of jumped at the chance because I've learned so much about knowledge management. I've done a lot of process documentation, instruction manuals, and thought really that that's kind of what we were going to go into but knowledge management is so much more than that. And so we decided to start with our TAMP. It's the area that, of course, I have the most control over, and walk through the process to figure out what's the best way for us to do this. So we're going to talk about why we're doing it for the TAMP, what our actual approach is, the key components of the knowledge management approach for our TAMP, and then what value that brings to New Mexico DOT. So why are we doing knowledge management specifically for the TAMP? Well, because we have it in our TAMP. So in our 2022 TAMP, our priority action, one of them was to strengthen TAM knowledge management and determine where there are the greatest opportunities with better reuse of information. And we struggle with that as a DOT as a whole, is getting information multiple times that could have been done if we had documented to begin with, and developing an action plan to strengthen knowledge management for the TAM, and then using what we are developing here to really kind of roll knowledge management out to the DOT as a whole. And then in our risk number 5, we had the risk of inadequate training and knowledge in the workforce caused by staffing levels and the loss of expertise as staff retire or leave. So we're using mitigation strategies to implement more knowledge practices and to encourage documentation and the development of how-to manuals for each agency position. And there's so much more that goes into this than just the how-tos and the step-by-step instructions on how to do a report, that we really feel that this is a process that we'll be able to use when we do have staff leaving. And we have some significant staff leaving this year and for the next 5 years. So some of the challenges and opportunities. So the challenges, we're definitely looking at staff turnover. We're losing a lot of people who have been integral in our TAMP implementation. And so when we look at doing the 2026 TAMP, there's going to be a lot that their absence is going to affect. And then the 4-year TAMP cycle. And I think everybody finds this, if there's something that you do on a regular basis, you know how to do it, you know where to get the data, just, off the top of your head, but when you do it every 4 years, it's almost like trying to figure it out all over again. So we're trying to eliminate that. It gives us the opportunity to collect and retain staff knowledge so that as we bring in new people, we know how this will actually work to do a new TAMP. New staff can get up to speed quickly, so we don't have to spend a lot of time training since we're already understaffed. That time is better spent elsewhere. And to streamline the TAMP development process and create a more sustainable process for the future. This is particularly of interest to us in our pavement and financial areas where each year we go into the TAMP. We struggle with making sure that we're comparing apples to apples and doing it the same way that we did previously. So our approach was to document how the TAMP is developed, including who's involved, what tools, and who does what, to explain what the key sections are, to create modular guidance. And this is of particular interest to me. Like I said, I love data. And so anything that requires tables in Excel always gets my interest. Identify all individual elements that require updating in a 4-year cycle. So there are pieces of the TAMP that don't, we may update a few pieces of them, but there are elements of the TAMP that are reliant on new data. We developed and applied a taxonomy for creating the TAMP elements that I'll talk about in a minute, and built a master list of those elements that we can update on a regular basis. And we're developing narrative descriptions of the TAMP document for the full document, for the chapters, and for each of these elements that we're talking about. So we really we're looking at chapter 2, since that seems to be one of the more data-driven chapters. It summarizes the inventory and condition of NMDOT maintained NHS pavement and bridge assets, as well as some state, non-state maintained NHS assets. And we do have some information in our TAMP about non-NHS pavement and bridge. We're looking at expanding that in the future, but now we focus mostly on NHS. So these elements that we started defining help clarify the material in the TAMP that needed to be updated and who's actually responsible for those updates. So the list of elements can be found in a data requirements workbook that I'll show in a little bit. And it really helps break down each little piece that's in there. So our elements are labeled by a unique element ID. So if we're referring to something, we're consistent in our reference. So it starts with the chapter and an assigned number within the chapter. So the introduction chapter is labeled 0 and the first element is 0.1. Second one would be 0.2. And then we identify the type, whether it's a text, a figure, a table, a vignette. And we just kept expanding what those were and then contracting it down to a good list of type. So on your left or on your right here, you can see that the element 2.4 is a text element, whereas element 2.5 is a table element. We've also identified the business units responsible for each element, the page of the TAMP where that element can be found, additional notes about what needs to be updated, and associated federal regulations. And then most important to making sure that we do this on a consistent basis over time is the source of the data to address that TAMP element. So we went through the TAMP. Again, we started with chapter 2. So this is all pavement and bridge condition data. And we started marking it up. And so we actually have a PDF with these markups in it and identifying what the elements are. So for this particular page in our TAMP, we have element 2.1, 2.2, and 2.3. And you can see they're color coded because this particular section deals with pavement, bridge, and pavement and bridge. We tried to color code what we have in there. So again, the first digit is the chapter. So we're in chapter 2 and the elements are consecutive numbers after that. So in this case, we have 2.1 being text that's responsible for both pavement and or from pavement and bridge. We have 2.2, which is a table or a graphic, and that we get the information from pavement. And 2.3, another graphic that we get the information from bridge. We have an Excel sheet that then annotates those particular elements. And within the spreadsheet, we have that unique identifier. So you can see the element ID, the chapter, and the number of the asset, what the element is called, where in the TAMP, the current TAMP it is, so our 2022 TAMP, what type of element it is. So here's where we have the contents and the figures, what unit or business unit within DOT is responsible for that, any notes that we want to take on that particular element, what federal regulation it references, and where the data source is. And I'm sorry, I went beyond the thing. So we have this Excel sheet for all of our elements for chapter 2. And then we have a list of the chapter 2 elements. And so here's, we have 20 elements within chapter 2. We have figures, tables, texts. I think we have a vignette in there here. And each of these links back to the Excel sheet that would have more information about them. And then we have additional information about each of those elements. So like the Pavement and Bridge Bureau update the text that described figure 2.1, which was the text at the top of this page. And the data attributes are the things that we included in the notes. We have for the state maintained NHS system, the lane miles, the number of bridges, the deck area, % of pavement in good condition. This is for the whole system, and then for the NHS, the same information. That information is contained within the text, and our supporting resources for figure 2.1 are our pavement management system, our TAMP analysis procedure guidance, and our TAMP data requirements workbook. And we know that the reason we're including this particular element in our TAMP is based on 23 CFR 515. So another element to look at the detailed information, our Pavement Bureau it's actually Pavement Management and Design Bureau, updates the information for this particular table. The data is reported by pavement. And we have, again, for the state maintained, the lane miles and the percent good, fair, poor. And then for the NHS, good, fair, poor, we also have a district map in the middle. This data is found in our PMS system. And so we know where to go get that information. So that's the basic information about our elements. And so this is, like I said, the piece that gets me kind of, jumping, because it's taking it all and putting it in all its little boxes. But what I've learned more about knowledge management is that it's not just all about those boxes, it's about the intent as well. So if we look at chapter 2, we looked at the whole chapter and said, what is the purpose, the participants, and the support system? So if we're just going to start developing chapter 2 of our new TAMP, why are we doing that? Who do we need to involve, and what systems are going to be included in that? So it's the same systems, same things that we've been talking about. And then we looked at what process we would take. So if we're looking at our 2026 chapter 2, we would want to look at the element production, the chapter production, and then review and finalization of that particular chapter for inclusion in the TAMP. And as we look at how we're going to update that information, we start looking at what some of that context is. So we look at why we're doing chapter 2, what the federal legislative content is, what the policy dependent elements are, what our workflow is, and I have some slides on that. Who's responsible for those things. So this adds a little bit more information. It includes our Asset Management Executive Steering Committee, as well as the bureaus that are responsible for that data, highlights the elements that we're looking for, and then talks about what things we use to support chapter 2. Beyond the actual people, but the systems and the documentation. And the legislative context is, for me, is a very important thing. When we were originally doing this, this was kind of the driving force where we had to be able to say, hey, we're doing all of this work and we're making everybody else do all this work because it's a federal requirement. So keeping that in there, keeping that on everybody's mind, we know why we're doing the inventory, why we're doing the measurement, what condition and targets are for and why we're doing them, and then what processes we're required to include in chapter 2. I know I'm running a little long. I'll try and speed up. And then this is one of the great pieces that actually goes back and says, beyond just the data and the how-to, why are we doing these things? And so we were able to say that some of our elements, and so these IDs are the elements that we talked before, are actually policy-dependent elements. And so we wanted to identify exactly why we're putting those into our TAMP. And so FHWA has bridge measurements, bridge measurement criteria, pavement measures, pavement measure criteria, and then information on our target setting, our reporting, how we do those things. And all of these things that you see that are underlined as I'm going through here in our documentation would link to the elements in the Excel sheet. So here's the overall workflow that I was talking about. We have it at a high level where we know the people that we're working with. We're working with the AMESC, Asset Management, Pavement Management, and Bridge Bureau. We've broken out in swim diagrams who's responsible for what and when they come into the process. We can narrow that down. I'm going to skip that one. We can narrow that down to individual areas, so we know where we're dealing, how the flow is going to work, and from some of this develop some timelines. The last kind of thing that is, I don't know if it's unique to ours, but it's different than a lot of the other stuff that we have, is our vignettes. And so we needed to have a kind of a separate area where we talk about our vignettes, because they don't have to be in a specific area of our TAMP we have a lot of people with a lot of really great knowledge, and when we can get them to give information to us, then we can decide where we need that to go. So for example, in this case, Ben Nahara, our bridge manager, gave some information about the state of our bridges and what we're doing with them. And so we want to include that in in this case, chapter 2. So the vignettes are these narrative reflections from selected NMDOT staff that are used to highlight specific aspects of the TAMP. We interview people, we get those information, the information from them, and then we figure out where we want to put that. It's a nice visual. It sets off to the side. It breaks up some of the text that's out there. We compile the information and the subject's reflections into a draft vignette. We have the AMESC review that. We use their feedback to get our final vignette, and then we get those in the associated areas within our TAMP. And then finally, the value to NMDOT, as far as I'm concerned, getting this done is invaluable, especially at this time of knowledge loss. But it captures the knowledge that we've built during the development of the 2022 TAMP. It organizes this information, so when we go into the 2026 TAMP, we'll have a better path to follow. It allows new staff to better understand the roadmap, not only what we do, but why we do it. It allows for the current staff to refresh their memories on that 4-year cycle, and it promotes reflection of the way we did the 2022 TAMP, how that was developed, so that we can see what improvements need to be made. So as we're going through the pavement and bridge sections, we can say, okay, these are the things that we did. What can we change? And it's very specific in all its little pieces. So we can say on an individual basis, if we get the information from here rather than here, would that speed up the process? So it allows us to really dig into all of the things that are there. So that's what I have for knowledge management. And I guess we're saving questions to the end, right, Hannah?
Yes.
Okay, great. So
All
thank you
right.
so much.
Thank you, Virginia. Our next speaker is Brad Sharlow from the Michigan Department of Transportation. He's the manager of the asset management section. Brad has been with MDOT for over 21 years. He's responsible for the department's TAMP and coordination of TAM-related activities. He previously served as a transportation planner in support of the call for projects, travel demand modeler, congestion management specialist, project manager of 2 state long-range transportation plans, and the supervisor of the Urban Transportation Analysis Unit. He has a master's degree in urban and regional planning from Michigan State University and has been certified with the American Institute of Certified Planners since 2020. Take it away, Brad.
Thank you. Can you guys all see my screen all right?
Yes. Oh, if you want to put it in presentation mode, we'll see it full.
Yep. The top of this is showing up just right over my slide.
It's if you click that icon, that's the fourth one to the right. Oh, there you go. Perfect.
Yep. Thank you. Yeah, good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here today to talk about MDOT's asset management process. And so what we'll do today is give a little overview on the asset management section, which I'm in charge of here. Who are we and what are our responsibilities? We'll discuss briefly what the vision for asset management is for the department at Michigan DOT. We'll also get into what MyTAM is and our initiative there. And finally, we'll spend probably most of our time talking about our experience going through the TAM data assessment tool that we're currently doing with Spy Pond Partners. And so just to give you a little bit of a background here, Michigan DOT has had a strong history of implementing and applying asset management strategies for well over 30 years. We've had pavement and bridge performance targets since the 1990s that we continue to strive to aim towards, even though we don't have enough funding to maintain those. We did achieve those targets initially, but are doing our best to continue to keep Michigan's transportation network in the best condition as possible by applying asset management strategies. So some of the key things that we've done over the last 30 years has developed advanced methods for applying asset management as a cost-effective solution to promoting preservation of our system. It's also became a core strategy towards our call for projects, which goes through our program and project prioritization processes. And then we have independently implemented these and asset management systems with several core areas across the department. And these just listed here are some of those that we have robust asset management systems and prioritization processes in place for. The vision for asset management is to ensure for the department is to ensure that our system is managed in a cost-effective and efficient manner. We try to integrate asset management into all of our everyday business and operations, establish, achieve, and sustain the desired level of service, and manage the risk at the lowest life cycle cost. And as I mentioned before, we have worked pretty steadily in applying this, but within each of our asset areas, now our focus is to try to integrate these practices more so across asset areas and with other initiatives that the department's involved with. And so about a little over 3 years ago, they decided to kind of create a new asset management section within the Department of Transportation. Prior to that, we have had each of our asset managements has and continues to be sprinkled throughout the entire department, with each asset owner and area kind of responsible for managing their system. Whereas that's still the truth today, we needed some type of area to kind of oversee and coordinate the work that is going across all these different asset areas, and with the goal at some point of getting an enterprise asset management system in place. So our responsibilities essentially is to provide that overall coordination of asset management for the department, to represent asset management strategies and principles for other department-wide initiatives. We are trying to expand asset management to its full capacity across all asset areas. We're also trying to integrate asset management with the other department priorities and initiatives that are going on, such as equity, resiliency, complete streets and mobility, accessibility. The list goes on in terms of all those priorities that we have out there. We really want it to serve as a partner and as a tool to help promote these other efforts, but not be viewed as sort of an obstacle or a competing priority or a competitor. And so that's where we're aiming to move towards. We're also looking at the development and we're also responsible for the development and implementation of the TAMP in this area. So like Virginia, I'll be leading the next TAMP for Michigan and going through that effort starting up here very soon. We are also responsible for providing the administration for the Michigan's Transportation Asset Management Council, which is made up of all the local governments and coordinating asset management with all of our counties, cities, and villages, and those agencies that are responsible for their road and bridge networks on the local system. And then finally, our goal is to develop an integrated enterprise asset management system by what we call MyTAM initiative, and we'll talk a little bit more about that shortly. And what this will do is provide a centralized data hub and provide tools to make asset management more user-friendly for data-driven project prioritization. This slide here just shows the org chart of how the asset management section currently looks. We're in the process of growing our areas, so that's very encouraging. On the left side shows more of the statewide or the department initiatives for asset management with our steering committee and our responsibilities towards MyTAM and our statewide TAMP and other department initiatives. On the right side of this is our coordination with the local agencies through the Transportation Asset Management Council and the Michigan Infrastructure Council, and the different tools that are required to support them. And so just seeing how this area is kind of structured and how we're leading our efforts. So you've heard me mention what the term MITAM, this stands for Michigan Transportation Asset Management. In Michigan, we like to put my in front of just about everything. So that's something that we've done. But what MITAM really is a strategic effort to bring asset management to all the different asset areas and business processes. It is really to deliver the next generation of enterprise asset management. We have made efforts to do this in the past and been successful in various ways. Now we're wanting to take that to the next level. And what we're hoping to do is for this to be kind of a one-stop or at least a one-start shop to access critical asset data for all the different asset areas and systems. And this is to support enterprise asset management data analysis and performance management needs. The thing I want to highlight here, though, is MITAM is not going to be something that replaces each of the individual asset management systems that, let's say, Pavement, Bridge, or Signals uses. They'll still have their systems that they put their information in, but MITAM hopes to be more of an umbrella system and tool that reads information from each of these management systems. That way, the asset owners can continue to work as they're currently doing, but the customers and users of this information who need to make investment decisions can go to one place to find this information versus 10 plus different management systems. The overall structure of how the MITAM effort looks is we kind of have 4 different tiers in terms of who we work with. And so at the top level is our sponsors, made up of our leadership team overall, and they provide the overall oversight and ties back to the department's strategic plan, mission, vision, and values. The next group is our asset steering committee, and this is really the policy board that we work with tremendously in order to come up with that direction and ensure that where we're going is consistent with other initiatives throughout the department. The core team is where we're actually the working team that is helping build this effort and are the most passionate. They're many of the asset owners and those who are leading either parallel initiatives or on the same track as trying to work. And so we use the core team as sort of our working group to determine the implementation efforts. And finally, we have other supporting teams that we work with here, like our region asset managers and our enterprise information management office, our GIS team, and others that are working alongside us to ensure that the direction we're going is something that they actually can use this for, and if we need some support. But this is just another diagram that shows kind of how we're trying to structure ourselves, as you see here. And so we're continuing to work as this MITAM evolves. So just some of the things here that we are looking at in terms of the current MITAM activities. As we mentioned, this section is only about 3 to 3.5 years old. And so right now we're trying to refine and build these relationships and with the other parts of the department and our roles to supporting knowledge and information sharing and that collaboration and coordination. That's what we've been working towards. We're also supporting these other department-wide initiatives, such as the digital vision and roadmap effort that's going on, another research project with multi-objective decision analysis, and each of our asset areas like pavement, bridge, ancillary structures, and others are going through either migrations or different new initiatives to help strengthen their processes. And so we're working hand in hand with them. And then also continuing to work with our call for projects team and our investment strategies. And then the biggest effort that we're currently leading is delivering our TAM data assessment. And so what this will do here is to give us a overall guide on where we're at today so that we can move forward and provide the department with some recommendations to move forward. So again, we're using the TAM data assessment tool that was created for ASTRO, and we were able to work with ASTRO and SpyPond partners here to start going through this assessment and we started this effort a few months ago and are about, I'd say, halfway through or almost halfway through the first phase of doing these assessments. But again, for those who haven't heard about this is an opportunity to benchmark current data and information capabilities, and it helps us to establish where we're at today and what are some initial next steps for moving to the next level. So the assessment guide, as you see, provides a structured approach to assess where we're at today with our current practice. It sets kind of a shared vision on where we want to move forward. It also looks for opportunities to improve the use of data for asset management principles. And this tool was developed through NCHRP project 08115, or the final report's 956. And so this just lists some of the tools that are used as part of this assessment. I encourage you guys, if you haven't looked at this, to go out there and view it. In terms of what we're looking for, this just gives you an overview of the different data and needs and priorities that we're trying to do. And again, we're really looking to assess and improve how data is used to support asset management, not just within each of our asset areas, but between the different asset areas and how they can help inform one another. So several states have done these different TAM data assessments in various regards, but when they got started here, I started in this position about a year ago, and I heard about this for the first time when I was at the TRB Asset Management Conference last summer in Boston. And so I was able to meet several folks and hear about different states that have been applying this, and so this got my curiosities up and running. And so from there, we were able to negotiate a contract. But when we talked about, well, what assets do we want to do? I'm like, well, we need to do as many as possible, because if we're going to move towards a true integrated asset management process, we need to look at more than just pavement and bridge. We need to look at all the different assets that we have. And so as you see here, we're kind of overachievers in Michigan, and we have 12 different groups of assessments that we're doing. But in all honesty, there's probably about 14 or 15 of these that we're going to be conducting through the time of this effort. And so from there, the approach that we're doing is we've been holding kickoff meetings and then 3 different benchmarking meetings that are 90 minutes apiece to go through the tool itself, and then to hold a post meeting and to summarize the results through each of these efforts. Each of these assessments probably takes about 1 to 1.5 months to complete, depending on the frequency. We try to do these either every week or every other week so that things stay fresh in people's minds. These teams that we formed for each of these asset areas has been a combination of the program managers, asset owners, and also representatives from our regions, TSCs, and others associated with this. And so our time frame is we're hoping to complete all the assessments by November of this year, and then we're continuing to just work very aggressively towards this. As you see, we group these assessments into kind of 4 area groupings. So we went through the first set with pavement, bridge, and ancillary structures back in the February to April timeframe. We are in the process of just wrapping up the second group with signals, ITS, underground electric conduits, and lighting. And we've just started the assessments for roadway delineation, pavement markings, and signs. And so those ones we're actually right in the heat of doing those currently, and had 2 meetings this morning, as a matter of fact, related to group 3. And then we're hoping to get moving on the 4th group more closer to the fall, after we use a little bit of the summer here to wrap up and tie up loose ends with these first 3 groups. And again, we're hoping to finish the assessments by end of November and to wrap up phase 1 of this by the end of the calendar year. Again, this just shows the deliverables that we've got with SpyPond to deliver. So we've done the initial assessment preparation work. We're in the process of doing the actual assessments themselves. And then we have received the summaries for the first group of them and share them with the different asset areas and our sponsors and our steering committee. And now, but we're going to continue to be collecting those through the other groups. And then we're hopefully going to have a phase 2 of this in calendar year 2025 that moves into developing a true action plan and implementation next steps so that we can figure out exactly what's the best approach to moving forward with an enterprise asset management system. And so with that, that's what I had for you today. I look forward to answering any questions you may have once we get to the later part of this session. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Brad. Our next presenters are Patrick Cowley and Chris Whipple from Utah DOT. Patrick is a PE and Director of the Transportation Performance Management at Utah DOT. His division oversees and supports the areas of asset management, performance management, and organizational management within the department. He has over 20 years of civil engineering experience in the public sector, ranging from geotechnical investigation and design to transportation engineering to transportation performance management. Chris is also a PE and the state asset manager for Utah DOT. He coordinates the investment and asset management of all asset groups across the state. He has worked in his current role for the past 3 years, prior to which he was a design engineer for 15 years, both with UDOT and as a consultant. Take it away, Patrick and Chris.
Thank you very much, Fiona. We appreciate this opportunity to meet with you today. And I'm going to give a little bit of the background of what we're going to talk about. And Chris is going to dive into the plans and actions specifically for organization and people when it comes to our asset management. And when he pulls up the presentation, although that is a nice picture and we could talk about it for a little bit.
It is a good one. Let's see if I can get the right one, shall we? Oh, much better.
Okay, here we go. So in the spring of 2020, so as we were in the throes of COVID, we had the opportunity to meet virtually as a department and take part in a workshop for the implementation of NCHRP 08-113. And that was the Integrating Effective Transportation Performance, Risk, and Asset Management Practices, or what we like to call AMPMRM. And in that workshop, we talked a lot about where is the overlap, how do we move forward, what's our roadmap moving forward, and what do our customers need? And so since that time, we've had the opportunity to bring asset management and risk management and performance management a lot closer. They're all housed within the same division, this unit that we have. And so we're very fortunate to be able to take what the FHWA has done with their TPM toolbox. And if you go to tpmtools.org, you'll see their TPM framework, and it's a circle, and it has 6 major elements to it with a few ancillary elements that match up really closely with what you find in the TAM Guide as the TAM Guide framework that Fiona showed us earlier. And what Chris has done, and this was pretty amazing, is understanding that TPM or asset management is the application of TPM principles to assets, said, hey, I'm going to take this asset management framework from the TAM Guide, and I'm going to incorporate as much of the TPM information in there so that we can go to one place and have that integrated framework work for us. And so this is that integrated framework. The words aren't exactly the same, but it has all the same content of that TAM framework and the TPM guidance where it makes sense. Today, we're going to focus in on the organization and people side of this. So specifically within the organization and people side, these three areas Chris is going to introduce you to and talk about the plans that we have or the efforts that we've done to move this forward. Understanding that, hey, we want to work together between performance management, risk management, and asset management, and that there's a lot of overlap of what we're trying to accomplish in each of those areas. So with that, Chris, take it away.
Okay. Yeah, we found that it was sometimes a struggle to help people. I mean, you know, this is TPM, this is TAM, and if people got a little confused, they get a little distracted, I guess is a good word. And so we pulled it all together and we tried to help people understand that really this is just the application of TPM. Because a lot of these principles were relatively new. People were doing them, they just didn't know that's what they were. And we're trying to improve upon what they already knew. And so that was a big thing. Maybe just to go back real quick. Initially, I took the approach of saying we're going to go to information and systems. That's low-hanging fruit. I found very quickly that because both organization and people, information systems are completely ingrained into the process, I couldn't just do one and then move on to the next, which is kind of how my brain thinks. And so we found, as I think many, if not all, have found that organization and people have to be at the center of what we do. Just to kind of tell you where UDOT's at, UDOT, we are a centralized model. So our asset management group is housed in our central office. We have one single unit. We do have some of our 4 regions or districts. We do have asset managers. I use that term a little loosely, but they do help with how they manage those assets, how they collect data about those assets, and are involved in some of the planning and project management efforts. We are a planning function, meaning we coordinate very closely with our planning group. And then a lot of our priorities or a lot of our focus is investments, and then how those align or a decision-making process, how does that align with our values? And that's really where a lot of my effort is, almost all of my effort is taken. Some of the things that we have done, we have defined our roles and responsibilities for asset management. We found a lot of gaps in that process, but it's slowly growing and slowly becoming better. We did our TAM data assessments as well, finished those probably about 1.5 years, almost 2 years ago. Similar to what Michigan's going through. It's a process, but it was super helpful to educate people on what how important data is and how important data management is. Specifically, the first stage, if you go into that, the first stage of defining the standards for data management, that's not something that we had really done before. People were doing various stages of data management. We found that through that effort, we needed to do data governance. We needed to do more in the realm of data governance. That has also been slow going, but we're seeing kind of leaps and bounds. It's starting to accelerate. We've garnered the attention of our senior leadership and a lot of people throughout the state. Our legislature actually just passed a bill that relates primarily to data security, data privacy, which is part of data governance. And so we're building on some of these initiatives to better ingrain data governance. Again, I kind of mentioned this, but we realized that there's a lot of personnel gaps. We are an extremely lean DOT. Every time I see other DOTs, organizational structures, ours is pretty simple. It's me. And you know, Patrick's my boss, and I have a risk manager that I worked with. And so our organizational structure is pretty straightforward. But we are finding ways to fill some of those gaps. We're finding new folks. We're kind of broadening some of the capabilities. We've also created a TAM communication plan based heavily off of what Minnesota did. And really kind of pulled that together to show this is how we're going to address that. We'll cover some of those aspects today, but yeah, just high level. And then the other thing that we did has been super critical is to define our values. We have strategic goals. We have a mission, a vision. One of the challenges is that it's kind of ethereal. Everybody and anything we do can be connected back to those in some way, but we didn't have specific measures and targets that connected our decisions and our actions to that value framework. And so we've gone through and built on some efforts in other areas of our department. And we said, there's our values. And this is how we measure those values. That's critical to decision making. I'm sure I'm preaching to the crowd here, to the choir here, but you understand that your decisions have to be based on values, and ours. That's part of our big push right now is to define those values and make sure everybody's on the same page, and understand that we're going to come back and revisit those values. So those are some of the things that we've done to help grow our organizational structure and improve people's knowledge of TAM. This right here, we're just going to step through a few of these slides. I want to talk about just where we're at, where we're trying to go, and how we can tell whether or not we're making a difference. What I did is I broke those 3 areas of organization and people that I showed you earlier into goals, objectives, and strategies, or baseline here and objectives, and then how we measure it. I won't go too much into this. Yeah, there's a very limited understanding of how broad asset management really is. I actually picked up this position just 6 months after it was housed in our maintenance division. And so a lot of people saw asset management as just something that we did to, you know, the things we built. And so we're broadening that, and you know, what Michigan's pointed out there, right, is it's part of the entire scope. And so we're incorporating a lot of the efforts we've done with digital delivery, creating systems to bring that in. But right now we aren't there. Yeah, and very little of what we do is connected to the entire life cycle. People don't understand, you know, what impacts that has, and we don't have systems to do that. So our goal here was to make sure everybody understands where we are and where we're headed. And that's part of this communication plan. We brought on some consultant staff augmentation to help with content creation, with websites, with communications, workshops. And you'll see that repeated through each one of these. It kind of touches on all these areas. Really just to improve the communication, and not just a one-way communication, but gathering feedback and understanding people's pain points and how asset management addresses those pain points. We're working on repositories for how we get information out there to make it more accessible, more consumable, to the point, and specific to different groups. That is where a lot of this is. As we go, we have an annual conference where we share a lot of these things. But we're also going to each one of our regions and sharing a lot of this material and gathering feedback. The other thing that we're doing is we're taking that communications plan, we're presenting it to our senior leadership as we're rolling it out. We're really building it from the bottom up. I know everything that you'll ever read says go from the top down. We haven't been stopped. And so we're continuing to build that support. And we find that's really the way that our organization works best. And our organization is encouraged to innovate and to find new ways to do things. And so we're building on that culture that we have. Along with that, again, I kind of touched on this, but we do, to what Virginia spoke to, right, of the knowledge management component of it. We're working closely with our education group, which is code for knowledge management. Sometimes that word we can't use, to be honest. And so we look at how we connect people's experience and their processes that they've developed. Again, very lean organization, and we're refining that, we're documenting it. And so some of the staff augmentation that we brought on is going to work closely to gather a lot of that information, to document it and make it accessible so it's repeatable. And I love what New Mexico is doing. And so we're going to continue some of that same process. One of the other things we do is look at the data management processes. We have a lot of people that do very good things, but very little, if any, is documented, especially in our ancillary assets outside of bridge and pavement. Bridge and pavement has very good documentation, but there's still pieces. And so we use the TAM data assessments as kind of the framework for how we're documenting our data management processes. We're doing that. The other thing I kind of alluded to is we hired a data analyst. She's actually going to be moving outside of the country here in a little less than a month. We're replacing her position with someone that has that data science background, but can also help with communicating the principles of data science, data management. And so kind of serve a dual role. In terms of communication, again, I touched on a lot of these. You'll see those are pretty much the same key results. But we found that our communication internally within UDOT is very limited to a specific kind of communication. We have weekly newsletter emails, we have periodic announcements. Each group can kind of communicate whatever they want. We want to make that a little bit more concerted. And so we're working closely with our pre-construction or our program management side of things, our design side of things, our traffic and safety side of the house, our data governance side of the house, and tying all of those into one cohesive message is really what we're focused on. And so we're looking at content creation. I'm part of our data governance steering committee, and so that helps kind of tie all of these efforts together and make sure as we gather feedback from everyone at all levels, we're incorporating that in and providing kind of that haptic feedback, letting them know that we heard what they're saying and this is what we're doing with it. And so that's our big emphasis in communication is helping people understand that they are being heard and that we're incorporating it. It's not as fast as everyone wants, but just realistically setting expectations and how we are incorporating them. This is just kind of a high level of some of those initiatives, some of the things that we're doing. Again, a lot of communication, a lot of content creation, making sure that it's accessible, that as we go in and we're interacting with our regions, that we're making that content available to them. We're following up, we're giving them assignments, giving them ownership in it, and really focused on just helping people understand how broad asset management is and how it actually ties everything together. It also helps that I'm on our concept development committee, which is asset management. And so those are some of the things that we're communicating and then gathering feedback. This is a high level of our communication plan. Again, MnDOT, you'll see that it's real similar. But what we did is we broke this into separate messages based on the audience. And so we are tailoring our content, we're tailoring our messages to each one of these groups. And we're really focused on the bottom of that pyramid right now. I want to point out our region directors who are in our regions are part of our senior leadership team. Part of what we're trying to do is really bring them on board and really help them understand what it is that we're doing and how it improves their efforts in the regions and really kind of ties everything together. And so that's where a lot of our messages are being focused right now. Next steps. This is based on a lot of the work that AppTech and SpyPond helped us with when we did our TAM gap assessment. We identified just some key things that we need to work on. You'll notice a lot of these are organization of people, right? Just helping our entire organization understand what it is that we're doing, documenting a lot of what people do on a regular basis so that we improve that communication. And then just having consistent policies, making sure that it's not only, we have a fun expression, we call it memo hell. So people write a memo and it goes somewhere and we never know where it is or what happened. We're focused on making sure that's policy so that people can see it, they understand it. If anyone wants to know why we're doing what we're doing or how we're doing it, they can go directly to the policy. They can see our procedures that are associated with that policy, and they can see why we're doing that. We identified the roles and responsibilities in those two. And so that's something that we're revising right now to add even more detail to. The other thing that we are working on closely is how do you sustain that growth? It's really challenging. Right now, Patrick and I are the process, and we're working every day to try and make the process a standalone process and something that's not dependent on people. A lot of that is documentation. A lot of that is getting that into policy so that when any of us moves positions, which is real common in UDOT, it's right there in front of us. We know the process. It's defined. Everybody's on the same page. So that is one of the things that we're doing is really just making sure that this is sustainable. We're following through with a lot of the efforts. We're bringing in as many champions as we can. Again, the focus is to get into the regions, to find the champions, to bring them on board and give them a lot of these roles and the ownership, which goes right along with our expanding those relationships. We're looking at the organization information, just how our organization is structured, and then we're building on that. We're looking at ways to improve our decision making and really bringing it back to asset management and TPM is decision making. We're helping you make better decisions. And we've seen a lot of success with that, where people start saying, well, oh, that's all you're doing. You're just helping us make better decisions. So we need data for that. We need documentation. We need structure. And we're outlining all of that structure and working on that systematically. I think, yeah, that's all we have. So.
All right. Thank you, Patrick and Chris, for that. Can all of the presenters come on screen? And maybe at this stage we could just go into gallery view, Connor. But we have a few minutes. If anybody has a question, please put it into the chat or just unmute yourself. If you have a question for in the individual presentations and we don't have time for it, we'll try to get responses. Matt Hobreck, do you want to just ask your question?
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Good. Yeah. I mean, it's pretty self-explanatory, but I just was curious, Chris, when you're talking a little bit about the way that you're memorializing or documenting these policies and procedures, is that kind of a formal policy process that you have at UDOT? Is that what you're talking about, or is it more of like an informal kind of documentation type of process?
Yeah, I kind of, well, I mentioned a couple different things, right? Like, so a lot of these, in terms of policies and procedures, yes, we have a formal process. We are going around and we're talking to everyone prior to what we call our technical committee. We bring that to them. They review it, they give us comments, feedback, and then we revise it, have more discussions. We come back a month later and they either approve it or deny it. And then that becomes part of our policies. Our procedures are separate from those so that we can edit the procedures at any time. The policies have to go through our tech committee, but that's the formal documentation in terms of policies and procedures. When you talk about some of this other documentation of how things are being done, that is something we're actually looking at right now. We're looking at making that more, yeah, I have kind of a document repository that I'm developing for TAM. So that would be less formal.
Thanks, Chris. Hey, this is probably a final question for each of our presenters. So, you know, given under the umbrella of organization and people and the work you guys have each been doing, which is all very impressive, what's the thing you wish you had that you don't have now that would help you the most to move forward and advance what you're trying to do in the organization and people umbrella? Who wants to go first? You have to, yeah, that's a big question, right?
I think what we need is more staff. I mean, right now we're a growing area. I started out with myself and 2 people who are primarily supporting the local side, and I've since gotten 2 more people in, and we need more people to really be able to coordinate and deliver this program so that we can not only do the technical side of our work, but also the, how do I say it, the relationship building with all the other areas of the department, because right now we're pulled into probably 5 different things at once. And so definitely more people. And I guess the other thing I would tie to that would also be just making sure when we're hiring people to do asset management, they know what, having the right skills and everything. Because I think a lot of people haven't heard of asset management until they join the state DOT years.
Right. Better training.
I can add on to that, Hannah. We're lucky enough that our staffing is stable. What we run into is limited staffing with the groups that we need to work with. And so it's difficult to get them to spend the time with us because it's difficult to make it a priority. So since other business units are short-staffed, we run into some of the same issues. And so it's because it's a DOT-wide thing.
Yeah, yeah. Chris, Patrick?
You want to go, Patrick, or you want me to? To go back to what Bradley said, I think, I mean, jokingly, I wish I had a more dynamic personality so I could convince people that like this really is all encompassing and it's important. because then people will go, oh yeah, no, you guys are right. Let's get you some more support. But yeah, no, I jokingly said to Patrick, I was like, every time I sit in these, I get a little frustrated because I look at like the number of people that a lot of DOTs have, and again, go back to me, and it really is. It's hard to help people see that this really is integrated, and I think for me, just tools and ways to kind of market asset management to garner that support at all levels, right? If we had something like that, that to me would, well, that's what I'm working on right now because I need it.
There's a phrase or a saying: if you fail to plan, you plan to fail. Asset management is a planning function, and we are very much a DOT of do, get it out, get it out. And we have more action than we have plans to get them done. And so I think to those points is we're not going to get more people, right, anytime soon. We may get one over the next 10 years, or we may get 2 or 3 that kind of shuffle over that are going to help us out. But if we can help people understand that if you take time now to plan and use that kind of network army rather than a hierarchical setup. So network army of people who understand asset management principles and that it's a planning function and that you're not going to see action from, the work that you do. I believe that that's how we're going to move forward, is helping people understand to do planning now will save you time and effort in the future, and that we're going to get a better return on investment. We are going to use those. I thought it was great how the other presenters talked about the purpose of asset management is to use the least amount of money to extend the life cycle as much as possible. If everybody's on board with that planning, then I think we're going to be more successful. I don't hold my breath that I'm going to get more people to be able to do what needs to be done. So how can we do that by not overtaxing everyone we're asking, all of this from?
Thank you. Just one final question from Sarah Lesnikowski. Sarah, do you want to just unmute and ask the question?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, okay. We have this TAM coming and TPM for the last at the national level with the new requirements of the funding, national funding, for the Congress funding of the budget. And with the budget deficit, what we have now, TAM is the source to implement the funding of the programs that engulf all the TAM categories. My question is there national data warehouse policy and procedures where all the state TAM and TPM databases are resourced? Because this is a tremendous effort that needs hands-on, knowledgeable, experienced people at the national level, at the local level, and at the state agency level. Is there also another question? Is there any audit for at the national or county, state, and national level that goes with it? And where do we find? Actually, I attended all the PAMs and the TAMs. I'm also licensed, but I kind of like lost in the minutiae because I'm an engineer and I'm focused on one type of the categories, safety. Where do I find? I do the databases. I do my design based on all these data warehouses. Where do we find the current and updated data warehouse at the national level? And when are they updated? at the national level. Like all of the states have their databases and TAM databases ready and input it, but it's in a process that takes time. But
Mhm.
where do you find the latest and greatest?
Yeah,
Timing.
so Sarah, I would say that there is no national data warehouse for, or this kind of information other than, there's the National Bridge Inventory, there's HPMS, which are federally required. You probably can find some of that information in the TAM guide, but I would, say your best resource is going to be the TAM portal, which is tam-portal.com that AASHTO manages, or the Federal Highway Asset Management site. But I think if you're looking for kind of, the analogous standards that you would have more on the engineering side, I don't believe that exists.
And Hyuna, one of the great things about the TAM portal is you can ask a question, or you can request that we add that information in. So if that's something that Sarah's really looking for, there may be states out there that have it at the ready and could provide that to her.
Yeah, yeah. All right, thank you, everyone. We ran a bit over today, but thank you for all of the fantastic presentations. As you all know who are on the call, you can see it again through the TAM portal webinar site, where the video will be there and the slides. And we hope that you will join us at the next bi-monthly webinar, which will be on Wednesday, August 21st, and it's going to be on TAM information and systems. Thank you to all the speakers again. Bye.
Thank you. Have a good day.